Hi, my name's Aurelia, and my parents cut me out of my grandfather's will. Not because he didn't love me, not because I vanished or failed or turned my back, but because I didn't play the game they built, the one where legacy is bought, not earned. They told the world I wasn't invited, that I had no place in his final wishes. But they didn't know. He left me something they couldn't destroy, his voice. So tell me, what would you do if your own family tried to erase you from your story? And what happens when the proof they buried comes back louder than their lies? Charleston hadn't changed much since I left, but the house certainly had. The Langston estate still stood in its brick and ivy grandeur, but it no longer felt like my grandfather's. The moment I stepped out of the cab and saw the manicured hedges cut into geometric submission, the old oak swing gone from the porch, I knew someone had rewritten the place, someone with a white-knuckled grip on image. And I could guess exactly who. The front door was open, of course. It always was, even when it shouldn't have been. Inside, soft piano music floated over the murmur of polite voices. I stepped in, heels tapping on the marble that used to be warm wood, and my presence made exactly 0 ripples. A few heads turned. None lingered. There was a table by the entryway, a row of printed programs. I scanned for my name. It wasn't there. No mention, no photo, no beloved granddaughter. Just Silas on the cover with Grandpa, both in tuxedos, like they were partners in something more than blood. My name wasn't on the seating chart either. A glance from one of the staff told me enough. No place card meant no seat. I stood there for a beat longer than I should have, letting the moment etch itself into memory. Then I slipped into the back row, behind the potted ficus. The memorial began with a soft slideshow, one of those overly sentimental productions set to piano covers of What a Wonderful World. I watched Silas pop up in frame after frame. Graduation, yacht club galas, even fishing with Grandpa, which I knew for a fact he hated. Isolde appeared too, perfectly framed, always in soft lighting. There were even photos of extended cousins I hadn't seen in years, but not one of me. I looked around. No one else seemed to notice or care. Maybe it was an oversight, I whispered to myself. Valora found me after the service. She was dressed in navy satin and a matching expression, sorrow tailored for social consumption. "You look tired," she said, as if I were the one hosting the charade. "Thanks," I replied, voice flat. "So do you." Her smile barely twitched. "We weren't sure you'd make it." "Clearly." Orson didn't even make eye contact when he passed, just clasped Silas's shoulder like he was the heir to something earned. I didn't belong there, not in that room, not in that version of the Langston legacy. But then Mara, quiet, dependable Mara, caught my eye from across the room. She gave me a nod. Subtle, barely noticeable. But it anchored me. Later, I caught fragments of conversation as I passed through the kitchen, headed for the side door. A cousin muttering, "Did she even get invited to the will reading?" Another replied, "I thought it was just for the family." I paused by the stairwell. Family. That word felt heavier than it should have. Back in my rental car, I sat staring at the wheel for minutes, maybe more. The house stood behind me, silent and self-satisfied. I pulled out my phone, thumb hovering, then hit play on the voicemail I'd saved for 6 months. His voice crackled, warm, a little breathless. "Aurelia, I know I've said it before, but I'm proud of you. No matter what happens, you're still the one I believe in." I didn't cry. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. That night, back at the cheap inn I'd booked last minute, I checked my email out of habit. There it was, a message from Langston Law Group. Subject, Will Reading Invitation List. Final confirmation. I clicked it open. My name wasn't there. Not Aurelia Langston. Not any variation. They'd really left me out. I slept restlessly that night. The kind of sleep that isn't really sleep at all. Just blinking through darkness. Your body still, but your mind wide awake. Morning came before I was ready, and the sun pushing through the thin curtains didn't ask if I wanted to face another day in this house. The estate was already alive with movement when I stepped out of the guest room. Distant voices, the clinking of silverware, soft-soled footsteps of staff prepping breakfast that tasted like obligation. I moved quietly through the hallway, just trying to breathe without bumping into another reminder that I didn't belong. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but I froze just outside the study when I heard Orson's voice, that carefully measured tone he used in legal depositions. The key is to tighten the public narrative before Friday. We need unanimous optics. Silas laughed. It's already handled. The Langston Foundation website goes live tomorrow. Press release drafted. All I have to do is wear the pin. I peeked through the crack in the doorway and saw him holding it. Grandpa's Langston legacy pin. The same one Walter promised me during our last real conversation. He said it was mine to wear when I was ready to lead. Silas clipped it onto his lapel like he'd earned it. Then Orson said it. Cool, flat, dismissive. She was never built for this. I walked in. They both froze, mid-sentence, but neither moved to apologize. Silas offered a half smirk, and Orson stared at the papers in front of him like I didn't just walk into the room. So, I said, I take it the family meeting's still happening. Must have slipped your minds to include me. Orson glanced up, voice even. We didn't think you'd be interested, Aurelia. You didn't think I'd be worth the seat. He said nothing. I didn't give them the satisfaction of storming out. I left slowly, with my back straight, like someone who knew she still had cards to play. Dinner was more of a performance than a meal. The table was long, the dishes over-decorated, and Valora's smile thin as rice paper. Isolde sat across from me, sipping wine like it was a shield. Silas kept adjusting the pin on his chest. Then Valora produced a small velvet box from her purse. Silas, she said, your grandfather would have wanted you to have this. He opened it and held up Grandpa's antique pocket watch. I recognized the scuffs on the case instantly. He'd let me hold it once, told me the family history behind it, the weight of generations in my palm. He'd said, one day, this'll be yours. You'll know when it's time. I couldn't swallow. My throat dried up. I stared, unmoving. No one looked at me. Not Valora. Not Silas. Not even Isolde, though her eyes flicked in my direction, just once. Later, back in my room, I unpacked slowly. I wasn't even sure why. I wasn't planning on staying long. At the bottom of my bag was a photo curled at the edges. Grandpa and me, sitting on the edge of his dock, fishing poles slack in the water, neither of us caring if we caught anything. I remembered what he said the day that picture was taken. Don't let them define you, Aurelia. Not even me. I sat down at the small desk and opened my journal. Title: When You Are the Ghost in Your Own Home. I didn't write anything else, just stared at the page until the lines blurred. Morning came, and with it, Mara. She knocked once, then opened the door without waiting. A small tray balanced on her hand, a cup of tea I hadn't asked for. Brought this by mistake, she said softly, eyes never leaving mine. She placed the tray on the table, then added, He didn't forget you. I stared at her. The reading's still set for Friday, I asked. My voice was steady, but my hands weren't. Mara hesitated, then nodded. She stepped back toward the door and slipped a folded piece of paper onto the desk before leaving without another word. I didn't open it right away. I needed air. I walked the grounds, through familiar paths, now edged with trimmed hedges and ornamental plants Walter never would have tolerated. The rose arbor was still there, though, wild, stubborn, beautiful. He planted it for my grandmother, told me he never touched it because she wouldn't have wanted him to. As I passed, I caught a voice around the bend. Silas. Once the paperwork clears, we'll get the Riverside deal going. Shouldn't be long. I stopped. That land wasn't just valuable, it was sacred. Grandpa had plans for it. Community plans, housing, education initiatives. It wasn't meant to be sold off for profit. He wouldn't want that, I whispered to myself. Back in my room, I finally unfolded the note. It was Grandpa's handwriting, slanted, sharp. If you're reading this, I didn't forget you. Check the library, behind the Count of Monte Cristo. My chest tightened. He knew. I was up before the light filtered through the trees. The house was still, a rare and fragile silence that reminded me of Sunday mornings growing up, before the weight of legacy and power crept into every corner of this place. I dressed quickly, pulling on jeans and a light sweater, tied my hair back, and padded down the hall barefoot, careful to avoid the one board that always creaked. The library smelled the same, leather and dust, with a faint hint of pipe tobacco that no air freshener had ever quite erased. Walter's books still lined the walls, floor to ceiling, untouched in arrangement, even if the furniture had been modernized in that cold, curated way Valora preferred. I knew exactly where to look. The Count of Monte Cristo sat 3 shelves up, slightly off-center, his favorite novel. I reached for it, fingers brushing the spine, and hesitated. For a moment, I imagined him watching me from his favorite chair, raising an eyebrow the way he did when I solved a puzzle faster than he expected. I pulled the book. It came free with a soft thud, and behind it, nestled between the wood and the wall, was an envelope. I slid it out carefully, unfolded it. Inside was a hand-drawn map of the Riverside development land. Walter's handwriting annotated every corner: projections, community impact estimates, even penciled-in names of local vendors he'd wanted to support. Only he and I ever talked about those plans. My throat tightened. I turned to sit on the nearby leather chair, the map trembling slightly in my hands. As I leaned back, something else caught my eye. A framed photo on the adjacent wall, slightly crooked. I stood to adjust it and froze. It was a family portrait, one I remembered clearly. It had been taken on Walter's 80th birthday. We'd all been there, dressed up for the occasion. I was standing between him and Isolde, his hand resting on my shoulder. Only now, I wasn't in it. The space where I should have been had been expertly edited out, seamless to someone who didn't know the original. But I knew. I remembered the dress I wore, the way Grandpa made me laugh right before the photographer snapped the shot. They hadn't just excluded me from the future. They were erasing the past. My hands clenched. For a few seconds, I just stared. Then, like muscle memory, I walked to the opposite side of the library and opened the small desk drawer where Walter kept flash drives. I'd seen him put them there 100 times. There it was. A small silver one, labeled simply, Her. I didn't waste time. Back in my room, I slipped the drive into Mara's old laptop. I'd borrowed it under the pretense of checking in with a freelance client. She didn't ask questions. She never did. The drive loaded slowly, and when it did, there was only one folder. Locked. Named. For her eyes only. I stared at it. I typed in my middle name, Elaine. Walter had always said it was the strongest name in the family. The folder opened. Inside, spreadsheets, legal files, PDFs of scanned documents bearing Walter's signature, property transfers, business filings, timelines, all meticulously prepared. My name was on every line that mattered. I didn't fully understand all of it yet, but I understood enough. He'd planned for this. I leaned back and hit play on the last voicemail he'd left me again. I'd memorized the words, but hearing them over this made them feel new. No matter what happens, you're still the one I believe in. He wasn't dramatic. He never made threats, never raised his voice. But he knew how to move in silence. And now, so would I. I returned to the library just before lunch, acting as though I had forgotten my phone charger. I retraced my steps, returned the book. As I did, something on the underside of the shelf caught my eye. A strip of tape. I peeled it back. Another note, written in trembling pen. If they cut you from the photo, it's because you were always the focus. I held it for a long time, smiled, not because it was funny, but because he knew me too well. That evening, there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find Mara, not meeting my eyes. Her voice a whisper. "It's not safe to keep those on your laptop," she said. "Meet me before breakfast." I didn't hesitate. I simply nodded. As she turned to leave, I said it aloud for the first time. He really did plan this. Mara was waiting in the garden. Dew still clung to the grass, and the sky hadn't made up its mind between blue and gray. She stood with both hands clasped around a steaming mug, eyes sharp beneath her calm. "Before anyone's up," she said, and handed me a second USB drive. I took it without a word. She followed with a neatly folded document, a short list of file names, notes, and one sentence underlined twice. He kept a mirrored backup, encrypted. "You've already seen some of it, but there's more. Legal level more." I scanned the list, eyes catching on familiar project codes. One line caught me. Langston Riverside Revocable Trust, transferred 74 days before DOD. "You're not the only one watching," she added softly. "Valora's got her hands in places she shouldn't. So does your father. Don't think the law firm's clean either." I felt the weight of what she wasn't saying. Someone had helped them. Someone with a key. "Let them underestimate me," I said. "That's what he counted on." I spent most of the afternoon in my room, headphones in, curtains drawn. The second audio message from Walter was rougher than the first. Recorded from a hospital bed, I could tell, but his voice didn't waver. "The Riverside property," he said. "They'll try to liquidate it. That land was meant to house families, not fund legacies." He paused, breath catching. Then, "This is for you to protect, not them to inherit." I sat still for a long time after it ended. For the first time, my grief wasn't just sorrow, it was fuel. Later that day, under a different name, one Walter had pre-authorized, I walked into the office of Langston's private banker. The receptionist hesitated, then let me through. The man behind the desk looked like he hadn't expected me. His eyes narrowed slightly, but he stood. "My grandfather's records," I said. "You were told to release them to me." He didn't argue. Within minutes, I was staring at folders full of transactions. Walter had moved core Langston assets out of the company months before his death, into a trust. With me listed as sole beneficiary, the will was theater. The real story was already written. On my way out, I passed Isolde in the hallway of the estate. She looked at me the way a cat watches a bird. Not hostile, but not kind either. "I heard you were at the bank," she said. Her tone was even, but I caught something else beneath it. "Looking for truth," I replied. She tilted her head. "Be careful, Aurelia." Then she walked away. That evening, I passed the open sitting room and heard Silas on the phone. I ducked behind the archway. "We're greenlit," he was saying. "Once the paperwork clears, we push the Riverside deal. She has no clue." He laughed. The kind of laugh people use when they think no one else matters. I pulled out my phone and texted Mara. "I'm ready." That night, I placed the briefcase on the edge of my bed and sat with my journal. I opened it, turned to a blank page, and wrote slowly, carefully, like a signature. "Tomorrow I speak." Then I closed it, stood, and looked at my reflection in the dark window. My face was calm, but my eyes burned. I took my time dressing that evening, not for show, not to impress, just deliberate. Black slacks, a dark silk blouse, low heels. No jewelry except the watch I wore on instinct, not because it meant anything anymore. Grandpa's watch was on Silas's wrist now, but tonight I needed to feel composed. Whole. On the desk, two briefcases. One held copies of every document, email, and recording Walter had entrusted me with. The other, my insurance, contained the originals, locked and backed up 3 ways. I'd learned from the best. "They wanted a ghost," I murmured to the empty room. "They'll get a reckoning." Downstairs, the kitchen buzzed with a strange tension. Valora was directing the house staff like a campaign manager prepping a photo op. Fresh flowers. finger food no one would eat, every glass polished like it might be in tomorrow's society page. "Is this a breakfast or a press event?" I asked, stepping into the room. Valora turned, her smile already armed. "You know how things are, darling. Legacy must be maintained." "Whose legacy?" I asked. Her lips twitched. "Still defensive, I see. You always misunderstood what legacy means." "No," I said calmly, stepping closer. "I know exactly what it means, and that's why I won't let you touch it." She bristled, eyes narrowing. "Don't start something you can't finish." I held her gaze. "I'm not starting anything. You already did." She turned her back, murmuring something to the housekeeper, but I saw the flicker of unease. I wasn't shouting. I wasn't crying. That scared her more. Later, I stood just outside the dining room and queued up the audio Mara had helped me capture. Valora on the phone 2 nights ago. Confident, careless. Once she's out of the picture, we finalize the Riverside sale. Richard's sentimentalism dies with him. I didn't press play. Not yet. Just kept it loaded, visible on my phone screen. A warning more powerful than any threat I could speak. Isolde found me in the hallway. "If you go through with this," she said softly, "you'll burn every bridge." "Then they shouldn't have built the house on lies." She didn't respond, just gave me a long look before slipping back into the shadows. I returned to my room and opened Walter's personal file one more time. There it was, the form I'd been dreading, a signed document labeled Consent for Administrative Transition, dated the day of his funeral. I'd signed it, believing it was a routine acknowledgement form from the memorial service staff. But in legal context, it read differently. Very differently. It was a waiver, a statement that I would not contest any part of the estate's administration or division, and it had been filed with the family trust board. That form had been tucked between condolence cards and a guest book. I remembered the staff member who handed it to me. Gloved, neutral. "Just a few things for record keeping," she'd said. I'd signed, grieving, distracted. They'd counted on that. I slid the document into a new folder labeled False Consent. From downstairs, I could hear the murmur of voices preparing for the will reading in the morning. But I was no longer on the defensive. They'd made this a war, and I had no intention of losing. I didn't sleep. I didn't even try. The moment I saw the sun breaking through the oak trees outside the window, I was up. The briefcase was still beside the bed, untouched, but not unconsidered. Everything was ready. What I felt wasn't fear, it was clarity. I backed up every file again, loading them onto a small encrypted drive, and walked it to Mara's car, which was parked around back near the greenhouse. She didn't ask why. She didn't need to. "I'm not walking into their trap," I whispered as I shut the trunk. "I'm walking in with the match." By the time I entered the dining room, breakfast was in full swing. Valora stood like a hostess at a curated brunch, laughing lightly with 2 distant relatives who'd never visited before, but suddenly seemed invested in the family story. Silas was already at the head of the table, crisp in his tailored navy suit, flashing Grandpa's watch like a medal. He leaned back, sipping coffee like he had already won something. "Glad you could join us, Aurelia," Valora said without turning. I didn't sit. I walked to the center of the table and placed a printed photo on the linen. Walter's signature at the bottom. A scanned deed of trust dated 3 months before his death, assigning Riverside and 2 additional properties to me. Valora's voice faltered mid-sentence. Silas coughed into his sleeve. "This," I said, "is what your story forgot to include." No one moved. Not yet. An hour later, at the law office, the mood was different. Colder, controlled. Orson stood near the window, while Valora sat perfectly still, one leg crossed over the other, as if posture could prevent collapse. I approached the junior attorney, Holland. She was young, ambitious, and clearly in over her head. I held up my phone and hit play. It was her voice, cracking slightly, as she admitted over a recorded call to not knowing what she was being asked to draft and just following Valora's instructions on the non-contestation forms. The heir left the room. I have time-stamped video logs, email headers, and data backups confirming everything Walter put in place, I said. I can provide them to the state bar if necessary. Holland stood. I need to resign, she muttered, grabbing her coat and fleeing. Valora blinked slowly. This is a misunderstanding, she said, voice velvet over steel. The law won't misunderstand it, I replied. Orson finally spoke. This is going to damage the family name. I turned to him, calm. You sold your pride. I kept my promise. I opened my laptop and projected a digital petition, already signed by over 200 Riverside residents who opposed the luxury development Silas had quietly promised to outside investors. We launched this campaign today, I said. The public knows who was supposed to inherit this legacy. Then I displayed the consent form they'd tricked me into signing, the one they buried in funeral paperwork. This, I said, holding it up, is what they used to silence me. Gasps echoed in the room. The lawyer overseeing the reading looked pale. Given these developments, we may need to pause proceedings and re-examine the estate documentation. Valora stood, slow and deliberate. You don't know what you've started. I met her eyes. No, Mom. You started it. I'm just making sure it ends. The boardroom at Langston Law Group was too quiet. The kind of quiet that made people pretend to be comfortable, shifting in leather chairs, rustling papers just to fill the air. I stepped in last, briefcase in hand, every eye turning like I'd walked in holding a detonator. Valora was seated dead center, wearing ivory with a brooch I recognized from the estate safe. Orson beside her, jaw tight. Silas leaned back confidently, hands folded like someone awaiting a trophy. I chose the chair directly across from them and placed my briefcase on the table, not touching it again. The executor began reading the will. Formalities. A few charitable bequests. Then, to my wife, Valora Langston, I leave. I let him continue. Silas received a collection of properties, Isolde a few personal items and stock options. I was not mentioned. When he reached the closing statements, I spoke. Calm, clear. Before this reading is considered final, I have something to present. Heads turned, some with curiosity, some with annoyance. I opened the briefcase, withdrew a flash drive, and handed it to the executor. Play this, please. He plugged it in. The screen at the head of the room flickered to life. Walter appeared, gaunt, older than I'd seen him last, but his voice still held steel. If you're watching this and your name isn't Aurelia Langston, you're trespassing on what was meant for her. Gasps. A sharp inhale from Orson. Silas shifted, finally losing his casual posture. Walter continued, stating without ambiguity that Riverside, the downtown holdings, and the Langston archival estate were to go to me, not through the will, but via direct transfer. Documents backed it. Dates, signatures, all captured on video as he explained each step. The room cracked open like a fault line. Valora stood. This video wasn't reviewed through official channels. It's inadmissible. I turned to the executor and opened a second envelope. This was? Inside, a notarized letter. An anonymous family associate, confirmed by legal witnesses, detailed how Valora instructed key staff to suppress Walter's last directives and replace the visible record with an older version. The executor read the letter silently, then nodded. This signature and timestamp align with Mr. Langston's final week of mental clarity. We will need to suspend review. Orson's voice cut through. Video evidence has no legal weight without proper chain of custody. I didn't flinch. The estate paralegal who managed Walter's directives can testify to chain of transfer. She's prepared to sign an affidavit. The room changed shape in an instant. A few board members stood. Some walked to the side of the room, whispering to each other. A cousin leaned back from Valora's side and didn't return. Walter's friend, Mr. Darby, who'd sat through every Langston dinner for 20 years, nodded once toward me. A simple, solemn thing. I stood. Not to gloat, not to gloat. You didn't just try to erase me, I said. You tried to erase the only part of this legacy that wasn't for sale. The executor straightened his tie, finally speaking with certainty. This reading is suspended pending further legal review. You'll all be notified. The room didn't empty as much as it leaked. People moved in clusters, eyes darting, loyalties quietly recalculating. As I gathered my papers, I felt a presence behind me. I turned. Isolde. She didn't say anything right away, just held out a small worn notebook, leather-bound, pages dog-eared. Walter's handwriting peeked from the edge. He wrote about you every week, she said. He was right to choose you. I took the journal, holding her gaze. No apology, but maybe something better. The boardroom emptied slowly, like a ship taking on water, passengers unsure if they should jump or stay seated. Some left without speaking. Others lingered near doorways, watching Valora for cues, but she said nothing. Her silence was colder than anything she could have spoken. The executor gathered his folders. This reading is suspended pending review of all newly submitted materials, he said, formal but tight-lipped. I didn't wait for acknowledgement. I turned to him and Isolde. I'd like to speak with you both, privately. Minutes later, we were in a smaller conference room across the hall. Just the three of us and the hum of a ceiling fan above a too-polished table. I reached for my second briefcase, unclasped it, and pulled out a manila folder with Walter's signature embossed on the flap. This is a notarized transfer of Riverside, the downtown properties, and the estate holdings, I said. Walter moved them into a private trust. All of it, to me. 3 months before he passed. The executor read in silence. Isolde didn't touch her tea. It was never meant to be debated, I added, not raising my voice. This wasn't an inheritance. It was a decision. He looked up. This changes everything. I know. Isolde finally broke her stillness. From her handbag, she pulled out the leather notebook I'd seen her clutch earlier. Her fingers hovered before she let it go. He kept this beside his bed, she said. I never read it, not until yesterday. She flipped to a marked page and handed it to me. Aurelia is the only one who understands this legacy's weight. I thought I was protecting his name, she said softly, but I was just protecting the comfort we'd built around it. She didn't say sorry. She didn't need to. Some things carry more weight in silence. By late afternoon, I was back at the estate. The house felt different. Not colder, emptier maybe, lighter. I walked room to room, not searching, just remembering. The parlor where Grandpa used to nap. The side sunroom Valora had turned into a reading nook for show. The old study that once felt like Command Central and now echoed too clean. Outside, the rose arbor still bloomed wildly. I knelt beneath it and placed Walter's final letter, folded and sealed, into the hollow of the small cedar box we'd buried together years ago. A time capsule, now closed with intent. I didn't come back to win, I said aloud, not knowing who I hoped was listening. I came back to make sure he wasn't buried with lies. The next morning, with Mara's help, I recorded a short statement and released it publicly. This legacy will not be flipped for profit. It will serve the community it helped build. I offered Valora a legal allowance, more than generous, but she would no longer be tied to the company, to the holdings, or to decisions that shaped what Walter spent a lifetime creating. She never responded. But sometimes silence is louder than outrage. That night, I sat alone in the guest room, the journal in my lap. I'd flipped through some pages, but now I reached the very last one. His handwriting had thinned near the end. If she forgives, she will lead. If she doesn't, I understand. I closed the book, pressed it to my chest. I forgive, I whispered, voice barely there. But I don't forget. A month later, Charleston had turned the corner into early summer. The air hung warm, but not heavy, and the birds outside the guest house window stirred me awake with something gentler than habit. I didn't reach for my phone. I didn't need to. Today wasn't about watching anything fall apart. It was about building something back. The guest house was fully mine now, papers filed, transitions finalized. I stood by the window, sipping coffee, and reviewed the plans laid out on the table. Blueprints for the Langston Community Center, drawn from Walter's sketches, some hand-drawn in the margins of his journal, others shaped by my additions. I traced one line with my finger and smiled to myself. Legacies aren't built in courtrooms. They're built in how we show up after the dust settles. Later that day, the local paper ran a small column, just a few inches wide, buried between a real estate ad and an announcement for a summer garden tour. Langston matriarch under quiet investigation. Sources indicate trust revisions concealed. Public influence used to alter estate trajectory. No arrests, no handcuffs. But public opinion had shifted. Whispers that used to echo in corners were now spoken aloud over coffee in downtown cafes. Valora stopped showing up at community events. Her name was removed from 3 nonprofit boards. Orson's face vanished from the Langston website, and Silas? No one could quite remember when he stopped calling himself an heir. I didn't feel vindicated, just still, finally still. One afternoon, I met Isolde at the Riverside site. The ground was cleared, but untouched, a blank canvas. She arrived in slacks and sunglasses, her tone neither cold nor warm. "You staying in Charleston?" she asked. I shook my head. "I'll visit, but I'm not here to dwell. I'm here to build." She nodded slowly. Walter would have liked that. And then she left. Not reconciled, but no longer in the way. The next morning, I brought fresh clippers and headed to the rose arbor myself. No gardener, no assistant. Just me. The blooms had started to overgrow, reaching outside the trellis. I trimmed quietly, remembering which vines Walter never touched, because those were hers, meaning my grandmother's. Nestled beneath the base of the arbor was a small bronze plaque I hadn't authorized, but instantly knew who had. Walter Langston Memorial Garden, preserved by family, protected by purpose. I sat down on the bench nearby and placed the journal next to me. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Some pages aren't meant to be reread. They're meant to be felt. Later that week, a sealed envelope arrived from the mayor's office, an invitation to join the city's Sustainable Redevelopment Advisory Board. It wasn't flashy. It didn't come with a title or a stipend, just a role in something that might matter. I signed the acceptance letter and slid it into Walter's old blueprint folder. A new plan, one that didn't require anyone's permission. As I walked along the riverbank that evening, where Riverside would soon take form, I thought about everything that had happened. Every lie, every silence, every moment I was meant to disappear, and didn't. They tried to write me out. But the truth doesn't need permission to exist. Forgiveness doesn't erase pain. It just makes space for peace. And this was never about what I lost. It was about who I refused to stop being. I've learned that sometimes the loudest justice doesn't come from shouting. It comes from standing your ground, even when no one is looking. Legacy isn't something handed down in a ceremony or sealed with a ribbon. It's built in the quiet choices we make to protect what matters, even when it costs us comfort, approval, or the illusion of peace. If you've ever been made to feel invisible in your own story, if your truth has been buried, rewritten, or dismissed, I hope this reminded you that silence doesn't mean surrender, and sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is choose not to vanish. Not for them, not ever. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt like the black sheep in your family? Like someone tried to erase your voice, your presence, your worth? What did you do about it? Or maybe you're still finding the courage. Wherever you are on that path, I want to know. Drop a comment and let's talk. And if this story touched something in you, even a little, hit that like button. Leave a comment with one, if you felt seen, or let me know where you're watching from. If you didn't connect with it, tell me why. Every voice matters here. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel so you won't miss the next story. Because trust me, there's more on the way that you won't want to miss. Thank you for watching, and more importantly, for listening.